about to be a savage. I see a lot of things that I want. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps I take from my bed to the floor. 5, 6, 7, 8. Will today be rough or will today be great? 9, 10, 11, 12. Lately I've been going through hell. 13, 14, 15, 16. Today's the day. Are you coming? Are you sick of being normal? I'm sick of being average. I'm sick of being mortal. I'm about to be a savage. I see a lot of things that I want. I will have them. I got a new mindset that I just established. I'll march through the cold with the nails on the pavement. I'll shovel that coal just to get out the basement. My story will be told, helping others make changes. I'll be so bold they will watch in amazement. Am I gonna face it? Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over? I keep waiting. Time is limited.
All right, how's everybody doing? We're doing good today? So I just got out of Dune. It was good. It was good. It was good. The first thing I want to do is talk about Dune for just a little bit, and then from there we'll move on to other topics and whatever else we got to hit. Okay? So I've seen all the versions of Dune. The only version I really don't like is the 1980s version. I think it's the 80s, might be the 70s, but the 80s version of Dune wasn't into. I loved the sci-fi series. It was great. And after watching Dune Part I, I guess 2 years ago, I went ahead and I did the audiobooks of the Dune series. I think I did the first 4 novels. Children of Dune and Heretics of Dune, all that kind of stuff. I gotta say, there's some changes in this movie I didn't exactly love. But that being said, I definitely am glad I went to go watch it. I do think it's the best movie I've seen come out of Hollywood in the last 2 years, maybe 3 years. I don't think it's the greatest song. I don't think it's the greatest of all time, like people are saying, but that's all right. I mean, people are allowed to their exactly love. People are allowed to their opinions and all that kind of good stuff. Okay, I'm going to be eating during the stream, by the way. I do apologize for not being here yesterday. Stuff was going on. A buddy of mine got in trouble where he works, and he wanted me to come out and support him. And I wasn't going to leave him hanging, so I went ahead and did my thing. So there were 3 things I wanted from this Dune movie. I wanted him to talk to, I think it's Jemiah or Jameis, more, because there's an implication in the books that Jameis is his best friend, and that every time that Muad'Dib or Paul goes away to be by himself, he's not talking to himself. He's either talking to Jameis, and every once in a while the voices that are guiding him, it's not his sister like it implied in this one, but it's his kids, his twins, that are speaking to him and kind of guiding him. So I kind of wanted that. And another thing that I wanted that the movie, I'm not going to say what it did or didn't do, but another thing that I wanted is I wanted where Paul cheats. He cheats destiny by going into the very brief future, even when it's only a limited future that he can see. And so lessons that he would have to learn, he kind of pre-learns them, and he applies them to whatever's going on. And he's trying to cheat destiny. And that's another thing I wanted them to explore that they didn't, where he's constantly trying to change things. But no matter what he does, he kind of gets stuck on this track to this great war. And then there's a line that I wanted him to say, which is, "I've loved you for 1,000 years," or I'll love you for 1,000 more," or "I've always loved you." You know, that kind of line that he says to Chani. It's not in this film. I wanted it to be. because that's really awesome because it's kind of gives you a breath like I'm gonna love you for 1,000 years or whatever. And the only thing that I would really change in this film, I didn't mind that they added character development to Chani. I always felt she needed more development, given how important she is to the story. Is the ending? There's a line missing from the books and from the series, and it's just not in this film. That I feel is super important. And there's a theme that's not in this film. So part of the reason why Janice stays his friend is that when you kill someone, you don't just take them, you take their wives. So if you don't know, Dune is based on Islam, and Muhammad had multiple wives. So Mohadib has multiple wives. He has his main concubine, which is Chani, and then he has his first wife, which is the wife of Janus. And there are other wives that he gets along the way when people challenge him. They don't really get deep into it. The main two wives, the conflict in the early books is the Janus and Chani, and then in later books it's Janus and Johnny. Sorry, now I'm getting the names confused. But anyway, Shani and Adelan. I think that's her name, Princess Adelan. That's where the conflict and tension is, and it's mirrored in the first book between the tension over there, and it's just missing that element. And I really feel like it's important to note that because that's why there isn't this like jealousy with Shani because in their culture multiple wives are normal. So I kind of felt like they were missing something there, but I get why they wanted to develop that emotion. It's just a weird note to end on. And it's funny because as a religion, I obviously prefer Christianity to Islam. But in fiction, stories that are based on Islam just seem more interesting, more human. While stories you have Dune, which is incredibly deep and interesting. But then you have stuff like Narnia, which to me I've never been interested in. It's never entertained me. It's never really caught my attention. So I've always felt like it's funny how in fiction, Islam seems to be like a slightly richer ground to mine, while in Christianity, the stories are a little bit become a little bit ungrounded because of the metaphor that it's aiming at, that of messiahship. So I just think it's kind of interesting how that plays out in the differences between Narnia and the differences between Dune, where Dune is much more human in a way, while Narnia is much more divine in a way. Like the characters have plot armor that the Dune characters just don't. And so that's interesting, and I really wish they had delved into that more. And I understand that they're trying to tell a slightly different story. I get all that, but man, it would have been nice to have that in there because I like those kind of. I just like those kind of inclusions and romances and stories. Like one of the things that I loved about Farscape and one of the things that I loved about Highlander and Renegade, well, when Renegade did it, but Forever Knight kept it, is that there's always this stronger female love interest. So there might be a minor love interest that's temporary, but there's a larger, broader relationship that's more important to the character. And I've always felt that's very interesting. So anyway, that's my take. I don't know. Maybe you guys think I'm silly. Maybe you guys don't. So if you all are just coming in, I'm about to start the video on the IVF stuff. So let me get over here. Tonight's drink is an old fashioned. We're going to do IVF first. And I think we're going to try to do Warren Smith. All right. So let's do this.
IVF clinics in the state to pause their services since IVF involves the willful killing of some of these human beings. But several conservative.
Okay, so let's start right there. So you have to understand the Catholic consensus and how this works. So this is not dogma. I want to be very clear. It is not dogmatically defined that IVF is wrong, but is the current consensus belief. I believe it's even doctrinal. So it's not at the highest level of officialness right now, and but most apologists and most Catholic ethics think that IVF is wrong, specifically because of the destruction of the embryos, which is potential life. Trent Horn has a slightly more strict reason, which is he believes that children have a right to be created in a womb or something like that. I don't really like Trent Horn's argument on IVF. I don't like his argument on abortion either, just to be very clear. It doesn't mean I disagree with the Catholic Church. I just don't agree with Trent Horn. I want to be very clear on that. But Trent Horn's arguments actually pushed me away from being pro-life for a very long time. So I was not, I was a free will absolutist, and then as my beliefs changed, I became a free choice, which is, if you don't know the argument for free choice versus the argument for free will, the argument for free choice is that if you choose to belong to the Catholic Church, you have to follow the Catholic rules, and therefore, if you're a Catholic, you can't have an abortion because it's against the rules of the Catholic Church. But if you're outside of the Catholic Church, there's nothing preventing you from having a different moral standard. Okay? That's the free choice argument. After reading the Didache, my views changed, but it wasn't Trent Horn that got me to become more Catholic in my belief system on that. Trent Horn actually pushed me away from a lot of those arguments, because he just came off as misogynistic and, if not anti-feminist, just kind of like ignorant on the problems that involved women, I guess would be the way to put it. He doesn't have really good arguments for these things. The better argument is an argument from authority, if you're going to go this route. And he doesn't take that route. He tries to use reason, which makes sense. One of his guests actually helped me get midway through the hump. And then the Didache is what got me over the hump, which was that at what point is embryonic life human life? That was the question that she asked. She's a bioethicist, and I think she's also a biologist. And that's a great question. When does life become human life? And the answer is, well, it's always human life. So therefore, the dignity of that life is important. Okay? Trent Horn doesn't make those kind of nuanced arguments, and it becomes kind of off-putting, the way that he formulates it. Anyway, we're going to get into that. I just wanted to give you that background. That isn't me taking his side or getting into the argument yet. I'm just laying the foundation for what's going on here. So according to Catholic doctrine and Catholic teaching, IVF is wrong. That doesn't mean that it will always be wrong. I'm not arguing that it's going to ever be right to kill embryos. That's not what I'm saying. If the technology develops enough to where we're no longer destroying embryos, or if some kind of massive biological tragedy happens where humans can't carry life on their own, and it's going to have to always be through some type of incubation or some type of digitalness, then obviously there will be exceptions. But the current technology does not allow for a ethical form of IVF. Put it that way. And, it's like the death penalty. So you would listen to Trent Horn 10 years ago, 15 years ago on the death penalty. He would have held a different view than he holds now. But his view didn't change because his view changed. His view changed because the catechism changed. which is kind of a shame. But there you go. Okay, so let's continue on. Background is set.
Who have opposed abortion, at least in the past, have said in response that they object to the court's ruling and they see nothing wrong with IVF and they think it should be legal. And in today's episode, I'm going to show you why they're wrong. But to do that, I need to give you some background on IVF and also.
So I want to be really clear on my stance here. I agree with the Catholic Church, and it's not assent. It's not affirm. There's another word. Consent? I don't know. My brain's somewhere. So my brain's in Dune. Anyway, let me say consent. I consent to their submit. There we go. I submit to their ruling and to their opinion. But if I wasn't a Catholic, I don't have an ethical ground or a formalized argument for why IVF is wrong. Okay? And right now, since this is not a dogmatic opinion, there are Catholics who are Catholics in good standing who disagree with Trent Horn. Be very clear on that. There are Catholics who disagree with Trent Horn here who are in good standing. This is not a dogmatic ruling. That does not mean that you can just suddenly say that IVF is good. You still have to submit to the ruling of the church or the teaching of the church. And currently, it's just not ethical, is the argument. Let's keep going.
Also on what happened in the state of Alabama. So IVF, or in vitro fertilization, is a process where a woman's eggs are fertilized by a man's sperm, but not inside her body. Instead, this happens in a laboratory petri dish. Some of the newly created human embryos, which are just young human beings, are then placed back into the woman's body, where they continue to develop and are born 9 months later. Embryos that are not placed in the woman's body are either destroyed or placed indefinitely in cryogenic preservation. In 2020, a patient at the Center for Reproductive Medicine in Mobile, Alabama.
So, part of the reasoning here that bothers me is I'm technically an unnatural. I already answered that BS. You got to come here earlier and on time, okay? I'm already drinking a drink. I already have lemon tuna. Maybe if you were on time, you'd know that answer. I'm not going to laugh. I'm going to keep serious. I'm going to make it sound like I was serious. Anyway, so when it comes to the whole unnatural argument, I don't like that argument because if we were going only by nature, I'd be dead. I was like super premature. Super premature. They had to keep me in an incubator for months. I was so premature that my hormones hadn't balanced out yet. So I have a little, I don't know if you guys can see it. I have a little bit of extra stuff here. I have some extra stuff on my foot. And I had more estrogen when I was born than most males did. And it stayed that way until I hit puberty. And then puberty just washed out all that estrogen and I started looking like a dude. But I was just very soft looking before then. And I got picked on for it and bullied for it. And that was not fun. So if we're going for the natural argument, then naturally I would be dead. So I just don't like his argumentation.
Wandered into a storage area and accessed some of the frozen embryos. The patient burnt their hand from the extreme cold used to preserve the embryos and dropped them, causing some of them to die. 4 parents of the embryos later sued the clinic for the wrongful death of these children. This would be no different than a group of...
Hot dog it. I don't want to interrupt for this, but BS gave a great joke. Cars are unnatural. I wonder why he doesn't walk everywhere. That's beautiful. I love that. Oh, if enough people hop in, I will switch this to an open room and we can do watch togethers in Streamlabs. Right now I am in StreamYard, so if someone wants to hop in, it has to be one guest at a time, and I can send them the link to hop into Streamlabs.
Of parents suing a daycare for being so lax with safety standards that a stranger could walk in and accidentally kill their newborns. This month, the Alabama State Supreme Court ruled that human embryos qualify as children under the state's wrongful death statutes. While many media outlets quoted one of the concurring opinions in the ruling that mentioned God, the court's main opinion doesn't talk about God. Instead, it says, all parties to these cases, like all members of this court, agree that an unborn child is a genetically unique human being whose life begins at fertilization and ends at death.
So there was some misreporting on this by the regular media, where it made it sound like it was a religious decision. There was one judge that gave a religious decision. He could have been asked to have done that, or he could have done it on his own accord. I don't know. But the rest of the opinion was a legal opinion. So based on the state's current laws, current constitution, this is how they had to rule. So it isn't like it was one religious guy steering the ship for this specific state Supreme Court. But the laws in that state have more right to life and religious overtones than some other states. But those two things aren't tied together. You can be right to life without being religious, just to be clear.
The parties further agree that an unborn child usually qualifies as a human life, human being, or person, as those words are used in ordinary conversation and in the text of Alabama's wrongful death statutes. That is true, as everyone acknowledges.
So I think there is a way to do this, to come to the judge's conclusion without it being a personhood issue or a right to life issue. And it's not even about property. It's about potential life. So if someone kills a woman who happens to be pregnant, you don't get charged with just killing the woman. You get charged with a double homicide. Interesting things, interesting little scenarios would be like if you kill the woman in a car accident while she's on her way to an abortion clinic, is it still a double homicide? And most legal arguments are that yes, it is. So if that's the case, then that's the route that this could have gone. It wouldn't have gotten as many headlines, obviously, but that would have been legal standard throughout the United States. I'm not a lawyer, I'm just being very clear. But I'm just saying that's the route that I would have gone if I was writing a summary. I wouldn't have gone this route. I would do it on legal precedent, not on moral, ethical standards.
Throughout all stages of an unborn child's development, regardless of viability. When it comes to abortion, the unborn child is usually treated as an unwanted child, or not even as a child at all. However, in vitro fertilization, it's different. The parents usually treat these human embryos as their own children.
Let me, especially once more of my atheist audience comes in, I'll re-ask this question. Hopefully we do get a good chunk today. But I wonder, because Trent Horn does these debates all the time. Now, this used to be his specialty. His specialty used to be pro-life, not whatever apologetics he's doing now. I wonder if he knows how smug he comes off and how that arrogance hurts his arguments. Like the facts of the case, he's fine on. He's fine on the facts, but it's his presentation that comes off harsh and hateful to some people. I was giving him a compliment for how he handled something, and the very next comment underneath it, this was on X, was just trashing him for being misogynistic. And they were like, in the argument, it wasn't even about whether or not he was right or wrong. It was just the way that he presented the information made it sound like the woman's opinion didn't matter. And I just feel like, because I've heard him do this with LGBTQ issues as well, it's like he doesn't realize how his tone comes off to the other party. Not how the facts come off. That's a different thing altogether. But how his tone and comes off to the party that he's supposed to be either converting or at least enlightening. He's just arguing, you know?
Means if their children die because of negligence, the parents want this to be treated as the wrongful death of a child, and not merely as the wrongful destruction of personal property.
And again, based on legal precedents, you could have gotten there without turning it into a religious issue. The legal precedent is that if you're viewing these embryos as potential children, and this is potential life, and you mistakenly destroyed that life, then you would be something like maybe third degree, or if there's a fourth degree, maybe fourth degree homicide, unintentional homicide. You know, that would be where the precedents would land. And again, not a lawyer. This is based on my understanding of law, which is minimal.
But you can't treat these embryos as human beings only when it's convenient, and then ignore their humanity when you do something else, like purposefully destroy them. For example, imagine a couple of frozen embryos divorces, and the father has the embryos destroyed. Could the mother sue for the wrongful death of her own children? What makes the most...
Yes. The answer is yes, she could. That doesn't mean she would win, but there's enough case there for it to go to trial. Now, it might be dismissed once it hits trial, but there's definitely enough question there for it to go to trial.
sense is to treat these human embryos as human beings, because that's what they are. Even IVF customers and IVF clinics agree they're human beings. But if these human embryos are human beings, how should the law treat them? Let's get into what some conservatives who are pro-IVF have said about this case. They basically come in two types. IVF...
And just to be, since BS wanted to know my stance on this, me and my wife are looking into IVF. She only has, not just IVF, but other alternative fertilization situations. Not to get too deep into it, but because of cancer situations on both our sides, we have to look at alternative methods for impregnation. And so we're looking at all options. I'm not looking at it as a moral issue, but it is an option that we're keeping open. Adoption's another option. There's other stuff out there, segregacy, other stuff like that. But there are ethical rulings by Catholic thinkers. These are not dogmatic rulings. These are not religious rulings. These are just people who are Catholics who happen to specialize in ethics, bioethics, and they have rulings and advice to give to bishops. Above that, there's Catholic teaching, okay? And then above Catholic teaching, so Catholic teaching is just the common teaching of the church, the common understanding. Above that is going to be doctrine. It means it's written down somewhere. That's all doctrine means. And then above that will be dogma, and dogma means that it's been ruled on, and it has an official teaching in the church. Once something's dogmatic, it can't change. While it's doctrine, it can change. Hence, the death penalty can change. Hence, there was something else that changed recently. Let's just go with the gay blessings thing. All that stuff can change because it's not dogma. It's not dogmatically taught, which might be upsetting to apologists, but that really doesn't matter. Who cares if they get upset? The thing with IVF is that if it ever becomes ethical, the ruling can change. But you can never get to a point that it would be ethical if you don't allow for the experimentation for it to become ethical. So there's some interesting, let's call them mental gymnastics or moral gymnastics around stem cell research and cancer, which is that since the cells have already been used, even though the act of getting them was immoral, now that they exist, we can go ahead and use them to prevent cancer or treat cancer or MS. Same thing here. So it's unethical to do the IVF, but once the baby is in the womb and born, and it's baptized, it's a Catholic, it has a soul, it's good, nothing's wrong. So everything you did to get the baby might be illicit, maybe even immoral. Once the baby exists, something good came out of it. Okay?
IVF is great, or IVF is bad, at least in some ways, but we can reform it. Donald Trump represents the first option.
We strongly support the...
Let me add, and this is not me being ironic. My wife's an atheist, and she's against IVF. So just give you an idea here. I'm Catholic, and I'm iffy on IVF, and I'm kind of like, if you ever get it ethical, I don't have a problem with it. My wife, on the other hand, who's an atheist, is against IVF. Go figure that.
availability of IVF for couples who are trying to have a precious little beautiful baby. I support it.
And to be very clear, if I didn't know Catholic teaching, like if I was just a Catholic who had only read the Bible or hadn't even read the Bible, just went to church every Sunday, I would be pro IVF. It's only because I know some Catholic teaching that I know that it's frowned upon by the Catholic Church that I'm against it. So it's, that's I'd be with Trump on this if it wasn't for that teaching. Because like I said, personally, I don't have a problem with it in a personal sense.
And today I'm calling on the Alabama legislature to act quickly to find an immediate solution to preserve the availability of IVF in Alabama, and I'm sure they're going to do that.
And
And I think there's something to be said for political law versus, I don't want to say moral law because that's a different thing altogether, but between religious law, religious understanding, and religious consent and religious submission versus laws for the government. So if I was a politician in a democracy, I would personally feel it's the responsible thing to do to go with the majority belief of my I was going to say congregation, but that's not the right word. Congregates. And that's where I think a politician should go for it. They shouldn't be guiding the morals of their congregates. They should actually be submitting to their will. So if the majority of the people who vote for you vote for IVF to be legal, then it's your responsibility as their representative to vote that way, even if you personally don't like it. And if you can't handle that kind of moral pressure, then you don't belong in office. That's just how it is. Now, for you personally, if it's immoral, don't do it. Don't partake in it. And if that's the ruling of your faith and you are a member of good standing within the faith, then you should profess that. And you should say, hey, look, personally, I don't believe this is right, or personally, I submit to the teaching of the church. But as a politician, I have an obligation to represent my district, and my district says they want this, and therefore I have to submit my own will to that of the people who I represent.
National Republican Senatorial Committee has advised Senate candidates to clearly and concisely reject efforts by the government to restrict IVF. It is imperative that our candidates align with the public's overwhelming support for IVF and fertility.
And just to be clear, if your conscience doesn't let you make that compromise, if you want to call it that, then don't be in office. Don't be a politician. If you can't represent your people accurately, then you don't have the balls to be a politician. You don't have the guts to be a politician.
Treatments, end quote. And here's Jack Posobiec, a Catholic
Again, you should represent your district and your congregates honestly and accurately. They're the ones who voted you into office.
Commenter who's going to speak at an event sponsored by Catholics for Catholics, who probably represents the second Reform IVF group. He wrote on X, "Embrace adoption for IVF embryos. Don't end IVF. This is the pro-life answer."
I agree with that. I think adoption is the answer to a lot of problems in the world.
He then said this.
I do think there's an interesting question here that we could bring up possibly for the debate. And, Charlie, this might be something that we could, kind of brainstorm over. Because if the issue is the discarding of the embryos, right, that the pro-life community, and I believe, personally believe, rightfully so, that we should talk about this because we do believe that it's human life as pro-lifers, then the real question is, shouldn't we try to find perhaps a productive use for this? And I'm not talking about scientific experimentation, but what about like a donation bank or something of this if there are extra embryos that are made and then not used?
So there's a lot of issues that need to be teased out here. But before we do that, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and support us at TrentHornPodcast.com. All right, so what are these issues? Well, one thing is that we have to separate the different moral arguments against IVF from one another. The main argument most pro-life conservatives support is that IVF is wrong because it involves destroying human embryos. Although someone like Posobiec might say we can get around that by just adopting all the abandoned embryos. But there are other reasons to morally oppose IVF. The most basic
The bigger problem is that there's thousands of embryos. I mean, you'd have to give a child to every person, every family. It's more a numbers problem, but okay.
Reason would be that children have a right to come into existence inside their mother's body and be protected.
Okay, I'm going to play this part again because this is where. So basically, up until here, I've at least, if not agreed, I consent to what. Up to the 5 minute mark, even if I don't agree, I at least consent to what Trent is saying. It's here. It's exactly right here that me and Trent are going on different pages. Let's go back.
Channel and support us at TrentHornPodcast.com. All right, so what are these issues? Well, one thing is that we have to separate the different moral arguments against IVF from one another. The main argument most pro-life conservatives support is that IVF is wrong because it involves destroying human embryos. Although someone like Posobiec might say we can get around that by just adopting all the abandoned embryos. But there are other reasons to morally oppose IVF. The most basic reason would be that children have a right to come into existence inside their mother's body and be protected from coming into existence.
So children have a right to come into existence inside their mother's body. Is that a right or a privilege? That would be one question. Number two, let's say a woman is dying. Let's go to an extreme. A woman is dying, and you can transplant the baby, the new life, into a willing woman who wants to carry that baby to term. And it's going to go back to the father or go back to the family who's caring for it. But another woman who is capable of carrying that dead woman's child to term instead of it being in an incubator, because maybe there's health benefits to doing so, a white cell count, all that kind of stuff. And they do that, and the baby comes out healthy. Now, again, slightly sci-fi, but the question is that an ethical use? And if that is ethical, then the baby's technically coming into existence outside of its original mother's body. Now let's go a step further. Let's say the mother dies and you put it in an incubator. Does that baby still have a right to exist? If it does, then that hurts this argument. So I don't think Trent's moral righteousness or rectitude here is correct as he thinks it is. There are like three other words I wanted to use there.
Existence in a laboratory where they might be shipped off to their mother's womb or a stranger's womb or to cold storage indefinitely. The moral argument often gets obscured by pointing to children who came from IVF and assuming that their intrinsic goodness validates the method that brought them into existence. But children who came into existence through acts of adultery, fornication, rape, prostitution, or via surrogacy, those children's lives are intrinsically good. But that does not mean the way
their lives are intrinsically good. Jesus says to Judas that it'd be better if he was never created. I'm sure plenty of us think that Hitler or Mussolini would be better if they were never born. Genghis Khan, Charlie Manson. There are levels of crimes that we consider to be inhuman. On the other hand, you got characters such as Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great who also committed great, great crimes that we consider heroes. So is it distance from the crime that turns them back into heroes, or is it the reason why they did their thing? So if it's only about the reason why they do something that keeps them from being considered a villain, if Judas was turning in Jesus as part of the messianic secret to get Jesus to die for other sins, is Judas still the worst upon worst? So in other words, if he was turning Jesus over for the purpose of sanctification and justification of humanity. On the other hand, because supposedly he didn't know, and yet he betrayed Jesus anyway, he's now considered, what is it, the child of iniquity or something like that. So, yeah, like, does intent and knowledge count? There's a lot here. Thomas says, I'm reminded of an interesting quote related to Taoism and naturalness by Alan Watts. Share the quote, man. I'll read it on air.
Way they came into the world is good, or that way should be defended. Other practical arguments against IVF include its connection to exploitative practices like surrogacy or commercial egg donation. The documentary Eggsploitation, which is linked below, exposes how young college-age women who are often struggling financially are coerced by offering.
But again, this is a kind of a bad argument because, again, anybody who takes a job they're doing it for financial reasons. Not everybody's rich. Not everybody's a well-to-do apologist. Also, you have inconsistencies from what the Bible teaches to what Trent is saying when it comes to things like anything from prostitution to the good prostitute to Nebuchadnezzar. You know what I mean? Like there's other factors. You can call them mitigating factors if you want. Again, I just think an argument from authority here is a better argument than this wishy-washiness. That doesn't mean, again, I'm not saying Trent's wrong. I'm just saying that Trent's argument wouldn't convince me if I was on the other side. And even listening to him makes me not want to do what he's saying, even if I technically agree with him.
Offers of tens of thousands of dollars to donate their eggs, even at great risk to themselves. Or they might be coerced into carrying these IVO embryos to term as surrogate mothers. Pope Francis has recently called for a global ban on surrogacy, saying, I deem deplorable the practice of so-called surrogate motherhood, which represents a grave violation of the dignity of the woman and the child based on the exploitation of situations of the mother's material needs.
Man, again, saying the same thing that Trent's saying, but just the wording is so much better than what Trent is saying. The wording there is just so much better than what Trent is saying. Even if they're technically agreeing with each other.
End quote. Another practical argument against IVF is that there is no objective way to stop its use at just infertile married couples.
And I want you to notice that what the Pope was condemning was the exploitation of women and children for this process versus what Trent is saying, which is that, well, the child itself has a right to the womb, has a right to the mother's womb. I have read way too much feminist theory, even if I don't agree with the conclusions in a lot of those books, to see a valid argument in Trent's assertion. There's too many presuppositions that have to be met. Versus the exploitation currently involved in it makes it an immoral act before we get to the question of a child's right to its mother's womb. You see what I'm saying? There's a less murky answer to get to the same conclusion. Why go to the murky argument?
The U.S. once tried to make contraceptives only legal for married couples, but the right of single people to have what married people can access was later upheld in the 1972 Supreme Court case of Isaac.
Let me read Thomas's quote. This is from Alan Watts. Hence, the infinite Tao is something which you can neither escape by flight nor catch by pursuit. There is no coming toward it, and there is no going away from it. It is, and you are it. So become that you are. And just to be clear, that Watts is actually quoting the Tao Te Ching. I know because I've taught from it for over 15 years. I read it once a year since I was 15 until I was 33. Jordan says, doesn't the embryo have a right to be safe, and isn't it safer within the womb? Technically. But the problem is that there's a bunch of, it's not just one egg that gets released. That's kind of a misnomer. And eggs get washed out and flushed out of the woman's uterus all the time. Also, inviable pregnancies also get washed out by the human, it's not embryo system. I forget what the word is. But basically, just like how white blood cells will attack a cancer cell, they'll attack a malformed pregnancy. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's what the body does. The body's trying to protect the woman from going through an unnecessary pregnancy, because pregnancy itself is a danger to the woman's life. It's risking her life. She's using a lot of blood. And so the body doesn't want to take that risk on its own. Now, these are natural biological processes, and Trent Horn seems to be, if I'm not misreading him, making an argument that natural biological safeties are the right way to go, and the way we eliminate the risk of potential excess of malformed pregnancies is to prevent excessive sex. So not having sex before marriage, only having sex with your husband, only having sex on days when it's viable to have a child, so only while the woman's ovulating. Following all the biblical codes of diet and exercise, so that way you're healthy and the child is healthy and you have a better chance of having a healthy child. The problem is people just don't live that way. And people who don't consent to Christianity or assent to Islam or assent to Judaism, because all of these religions, even Judaism, hold that abortion is wrong, and IVF, for the most part, to be wrong, is that people who are outside of the faith have no obligation to consent to that faith. And Trent's argument isn't arguing. I could agree with Trent 100% if he was saying all Catholics must follow the church's teaching on this and not get IVF. I could get on board with that. But he's arguing that no one should have access to IVF because of these arbitrary standards that we say come from God. You see the issue here? The issue is not whether or not Catholics should or should not partake in IVF, partake in sex before marriage. That's not the question. The ruling of the Catholic Church is, if you want to be of us, be one of us. If you're going to be Catholic, you can't do those things. You might still do them, but you're not allowed. You're going to have to confess it to the priest. It's a mortal sin. You're not living up to your agreement, to your half of the covenant when you took your vows when you became a Catholic. But giving that argument to someone outside of the Catholic Church, someone who never agreed to submit to these rules, why do they have to submit to them if there is medication and science to prevent these things from being a problem? It's understandable that when there was a time that these things were not able to be dealt with scientifically or medically, of course, the Catholic teaching is good for all humanity. But once we have science that can overcome the restrictions of biology, if someone doesn't consent to your rules, why should they follow them? If they don't even want to be part of your group to begin with. The Bible is very clear on this. They don't have to. You walk away from them and you let them live their lives. You're only supposed to speak to the people who welcome you. Those who don't want to listen to your message, you leave behind. As an apologist, Trent Horn can't do that because he's not an apologist for fellow Christians. I found this out really quick when I started getting into Catholicism. Apologists are speaking to people who are not Christian. So they're trying to impose their opinions on non-Christians, which I think is a problem. Apologetics is much better as a defense of the faith for the faithful when atheists or Muslims or Buddhists come and question our faith, so we have an answer for it. We have a defense for our faith. That is the proper use of apologetics. I think this is a slight misuse of apologetics because it's trying to apply a principle for the in-group to the out-group.
Eisenstat versus Bard. So there's nothing to keep a man from ordering a sperm donor, an egg donor, have embryos created from that in IVF, use a surrogate womb to gestate the child, and then have the child delivered to him, the consumer. Here's one story about
Right,
John,
Thomas.
an unmarried, self-identified gay man in Atlanta who saved up hundreds of thousands of dollars to acquire a child through the IVF process. And another story of an unmarried man in Britain who hoped to use IVF to become a single father after this became legal in 2019. So whether it's someone like Trump who thinks IVF is tremendous, or someone like Posobiec who thinks it can be reformed, I would tell them that IVF is intrinsically evil. It is evil by its very nature.
But he didn't set up that argument. He gave examples of things that he himself... Look, let's go back. Okay? Listen to his argument. My problem is not with Trent, and my problem is not with the Catholic teaching. My problem is with his argument. Listen to the fallacy, to the problem of his argument. He is stating that because this other thing he considers evil can be done, therefore the thing itself is evil. But the person outside of the in circle, why would they agree with Trent that this thing is evil? Again, listen. Listen to his actual words. Listen to the problem with his argument.
Keep a man from ordering a sperm donor, an egg donor, was later upheld in the 1972 Supreme Court case of Eisenstadt versus Bard. So there's nothing to keep a man from ordering a sperm donor.
So again, his objection. There's nothing to keep a man from ordering a sperm donor.
An egg donor, have
An egg
embryos
donor.
created from that in IVF,
To have embryos created in IVF.
use a surrogate womb to
To
gestate
use
the
a surrogate
child,
womb.
and then have the child delivered to him, the consumer.
And then to have
Here's
the child
one-
delivered to him. And now he's adding the consumer. But each one of these qualifiers, each one of these sins are only sins to Trent, the Catholic Church, and fellow Catholics who assent to the Catholic Church's teaching. Why are these things each on their own being qualified as evil? Even if you and I, the viewer, who are Christians, agree with him, in his argument, what has he presented to make the case? Why is it wrong outside of going to an objective point of view of God? If God is not your objective point of view, if your single coin, if your single shekel in the tent, how are you getting there? Jordan says, yes, Trent seems to have the ability to take the other person's perspective. I would agree with that. But the problem is that he's implying, he's telling the outsider that they have to submit to the Catholic Church's teaching. If God doesn't force the atheist to believe in him, if God doesn't stop the murderer from murdering, why do we, the sons of God, the children of God, the adopted children of God, have the authority to enforce our will upon those who God does not enforce his will upon? That's the question. I'm not saying there's not an answer for it, but Trent's not giving one.
Story about John, an unmarried, self-identified gay man in Atlanta who saved up hundreds of thousands of dollars to acquire a child through the IVF process. And another story of an unmarried man in...
Let's think about this, okay? On the case for morality and the way that Trent argues. A woman who was assigned male at birth and a man who was assigned woman at birth gets married, has a kid. Under his definition of heterosexuality, they're involved in a heterosexual marriage. So they're not doing anything wrong immorally. Would he still condemn them under his formula? Or does he have the ability to see beyond his biases and beyond his personal internalized phobias to see the value of that relationship? A child abandoned, injured, hurt, gets adopted by a gay or lesbian or bisexual couple, and the couple's now in a loving home. Does he have the ability to see beyond their supposed sins to the value that the family is giving to this child. And this isn't hypothetical for me. I grew up in a single parent household with only a father. Okay? So this is not hypothetical, what if someone's in a better situation, you in a worse situation than you? I come from a single parent household with only a father. So is my growing up somehow immoral, according to Trent's understanding? I don't think he would argue that. So he has to have a better justification than what he's giving in this argument to get someone to agree with him without him just coming off as arrogant and judgmental. You see what I'm saying?
In Britain, who hoped to use IVF to become a single father after this became legal in 2019. So whether it's someone like Trump who thinks IVF is tremendous, or someone like Posobiec who thinks it can be reformed, I would tell them that IVF is intrinsically evil. It is evil by its very nature because it perverts the maternal process of creating a child.
IVF is evil because it perverts the maternal process of having a child. So are C-sections immoral? Is a incubator immoral? Is giving a child hormones while they're in the womb so they can match their genetic potential immoral? Is treating children for Down syndrome or blindness or deafness before they come out of the womb, is that immoral? Because you are violating nature. By nature, that child was blind. By nature, that child was dyslexic. By nature, that child was deformed. So, easy peasy way to put this. According to current Catholic teaching, which again, I submit to, if I was to get this fixed, if I was to get my foot fixed, it causes no pain, has no problem. It's just purely aesthetic. I was a semi-professional fighter, underground fighter, for over 15 years. Only fought in local matches, never made it big, but my nose is so crooked, it looks like my face is slanted. If I go get this fix, am I violating nature? And if I'm violating nature, if I get this fixed, am I sinning? Is it only when I can no longer breathe out of this nostril, which has happened before, it's collapsed before, only then when it needs to be fixed is that no longer a sin? This is the questions that Trent is leaving open and not answering. And I'm not saying answering by saying yes, no, yes, this is sin, no, that's not a sin. In his explanation, what's the difference between the unnaturalness of fixing these cosmetic problems? And there's some other spots as well. If I fix those cosmetics problems to be more male and to look more human, am I technically violating nature and therefore sinning? Is it just vanity?
And it's also evil because it's associated with a whole host of moral hazards that are bad for society, like gamete donation and surrogacy. Now, let me try to steelman Posobiec's position. When he says don't end IVF, I hope as a Catholic he means it would not be prudent to try and ban.
See, and now he's mind reading and he's implying his interpretation of the church's teachings onto another person, which is, again, is where I feel the arrogance comes in. So just to be clear, I agree with Trent Horn. I assent to the Catholic Church's teachings, and I think Trent Horn is one of the top 2 or top 3 Catholic apologists in the world currently active. Okay? All of that's true. I think his argumentation is arrogant and dismissive. That doesn't mean I can do better, but I can see the flaws in his argument. And I can see how his argument, if I didn't already consent to what the church teaches, would send me away from the church teaching.
And IVF right now, because we should end IVF. We should do that, even if it would take a very long time by changing public opinion, because in vitro fertilization is evil, it harms children, and it harms society. But perhaps what...
How? Explain how. Not why you feel it does. Explain the actual reasons how it harms nature or it's evil. Don't tell me because a child has a right to its mother's womb. That's not a reason why it's evil. Now you can say because of the amount of life wasted or potential life that is wasted. Fine. But again, you have to explain why natural processes like nocturnal emissions or a woman flushing out of her uterus is not an act in evil just because it's natural. And what is unnatural about a thing done in nature? See, that's the other problem that Trent Horn and most of these apologists don't address. Anything done in nature is natural. The moment humans are doing something doesn't make it unnatural. We ourselves are part of nature. When an ant makes an anthill and tears down other pieces of grass and builds something new, that's not unnatural. When a gorilla uses a stick and turns it into a tool, that is not unnatural. So what is unnatural about human beings using their natural processes to create? These are not good arguments. These are not good arguments. I realize they're impressive arguments. I realize that he's more famous than I am, that he's better at this than I am, but they're not good arguments.
What Posobiec means is just don't end IVF right now in this election cycle. And from a strategy perspective, this can be acceptable. We as Catholics are allowed to recognize that it isn't always politically feasible to achieve the goods that we want or to ban the evils.
No, I wouldn't just say feasible. It's not always prudent. Oh, no, clearly he's not, because he argues against homosexuality and stuff like that, too. I'm not saying that that's what he's saying overall. I'm saying that's what he's presenting in this video. His argument in this video, which is the video... So, right now, maybe 10 or 12 people are going to see me saying this. Thousands of people heard him present his bad argument, his callous, arrogant argument. So people are going to wrongly think that all of Catholicism is going to be misogynistic, anti-woman, anti-child, and anti-natal, which we are none of those things. But based on Trent's argument, people who are only hearing the buzzwords are going to take it a very different way than what he means. Just stop listening to only your own side. Start listening to what the other side is saying, and you'll see this all the time.
Doesn't need to be banned. And this may be the case. It's not politically feasible to ban in vitro fertilization right now due to its high level of popular support. In politics, you have to pick your battles. And given the difficulty pro-lifers have had with banning abortion at the ballot box since Dobbs overturned Roe v. Wade, pro-lifers have to be realistic about what they can accomplish.
Again, he misunderstood what that was about. That was not about abortion. That was about states' rights. Both sides have miscolored what that overturning was. It stated that the states had a right to determine for themselves the laws that they wanted. And most of the states did want abortion, just in either a more limited or in a more responsible sense than what the federal government was allowing. That's why you don't see massive abortion bans. I realize that that's not what Trent wants to hear, but most people don't agree with him. And he seems to be stuck in a bubble where he thinks that his opinion is the majority opinion, which I know he's not. I know he's not so arrogant to think that, but that's how he presents his arguments, as if that's what he thinks. Is anyone catching what I'm saying?
Accomplish with their finite resources. In fact, the Alabama Attorney General has even said he has no desire to prosecute IVF clinics. And the Alabama legislature and governor want to pass a bill that would exclude IVF embryos from being considered legal persons. In the Gospel of Life, Pope St. John Paul II said the following of pro-abortion laws, which could also apply.
So, again, I wonder if he has a problem with this exact same technology being done for chicken eggs, or if we somehow bring back extinct animals. I'm not going so far as dinosaurs. I'm just saying like actual animals that we can bring back, like, certain types of wolves, certain types of foxes. Would he consider that preservation of life evil? Would he consider us bringing back certain extinct animals like the dodo back into existence and protecting them? Or expanding the amount of, let's say, panda bears there are through genetic and fertility manipulation? Would he consider that evil? Is it only evil when it's done to a human being? Because it's done to flowers and plants all the time. Some of the most important Catholic scientists that do genetics did exactly that. They did genetic fertilization, manipulation on fish, on birds, on flowers. And when does that act become evil? Is it only evil when it's done to a human? These are things that he's not addressing and that he's not putting into perspective in a video like this.
Apply to laws dealing with IVF. When it is not possible to overturn or completely abrogate a pro-abortion law, an elected official whose absolute personal opposition to procured abortion was well known could licitly support proposals aimed at limiting the harm done by such a law and at lessening its negative consequences at the level of...
But listen to the difference between what Pope John Paul II is saying and what Trent Horn is saying. Limiting and lessening the negative consequences. That's so different than what Trent Horn is saying. Trent Horn is going for a blanket. Let's just stop it all and make it all end because I hate this thing. Technology and science is not going in your direction, man. It's just not.
General opinion and public morality, end quote. So Posobic's steelman position might be this. Don't outlaw IVF right now since you're going to lose. Instead, prohibit...
Okay, Watchmen, welcome to the channel. Please like, please subscribe, please share this with your friends. We're still going. We're going to go strong. We're going to go. I'm going to go back a little bit because I don't not understand why Trent Horn can't see. Okay. Which is not possible to overturn or completely abrogate a pro-abortion law. An elected official whose absolute personal opposition to procured abortion was well known could licitly, that means allowably, could, where was I? To procure abortion was well known, could licitly, that means allowably, support proposals aimed at limiting the harm done by such a law, by limiting harm done by such a law, and at lessening the negative consequences. So the proper Catholic thing to do, according to a former pope who is also a saint, is to lessen the damage done, the evil done by the act, not eliminating the option for that evil act. Not because the evil act is good, but because the damage you could do to the other individuals is greater with non-regulation and with trying to absolutely ban a certain practice you don't like. The amount of evil you're bringing into the world could overweigh the amount of good you're trying to do. How come Trent can't understand that? I don't know.
And public morality, end quote. So Posobic's steelman position might be this. Don't outlaw IVF right now since you're going to lose. Instead, prohibit the intentional destruction.
Okay, I don't like what Trent Horn's saying, so I'm going to let him finish, and I'll give you my mind-reading version, okay?
Of embryos created through the IVF process, but keep IVF legal. However, IVF clinics would still shut down under those regulations because they all basically end up destroying human embryos that are considered, as one poster on X called them, low quality, which often refers to embryos with genetic conditions like Down syndrome, another part of IVF's dehumanizing process.
Okay, again, he's assuming too much there. But let me reword his argument here to something that I would find more acceptable, at least. We should limit the funding. No, scratch that. We should limit the access to IVF for families until the process becomes more ethical and has less access embryos that are unusable or that are viable but can never be used. We should instead expand funding for now for animal testing and the genetics testing and even digital and virtual testing until it becomes a more ethical practice. Then it should be revisited by the law, and we should have bioethicists test for viability and for safety and for moral ethicalness. Once that is done, if we find it to be ethical at that time, we can then reopen it to the broader public. But until then, it should be limited until it can ever be ethical. But that's me. I'm not Trent Horn.
And as I noted, it would be hard to get a ban like this passed in the first place. But you don't have to propose banning the destruction of IVF embryos. Instead, you can just ask people this question. Parents who have children through IVF see these...
I mean, there's another way right there, which is you limit until the number of embryos that are created are minimal enough and viable enough that they do not have to be destroyed, and until we have a distribution system that means that all embryos that are created are do have a home in a future womb. Now, if that flips to where now we can just create babies in a machine, now we got a whole other different ethical question here. But that's not the question that's being asked. The question is not IVF in the future in an artificial womb. The question is IVF currently in a human that can gestate it. Thank you, Jordan.
Embryos as their babies. So shouldn't those parents be allowed to treat those embryos like babies? This approach would allow parents to sue IVF clinics for wrongful death when embryos are negligently killed, or tie up these clinics in family court proceedings where the embryos have to be treated like children in things like divorce cases. Instead of a controversial frontal assault on IVF, we could promote a solution most people in society can be on board with that ends up undermining IVF anyways and leads to clinics voluntarily shutting down. This kind of approach is also called a Fabian strategy. It's named after Quintus Fabius Maximus. He used small skirmishes to slowly wear down the much stronger Carthaginian army led by Hannibal in the Second Punic War instead of a frontal assault. Hannibal, by the way, is the guy who crossed the Alps with elephants. So you win by slow attrition rather than by a full frontal assault. A similar approach was used to end the slave trade in England in the 19th century. As dramatized in the 2006 film Amazing Grace, abolitionists who opposed the slave trade passed a law that simply targeted the use of neutral flags during the 1806 war with France. And this had the unintended effect of making the slave trade unfeasible for most British slave trading companies. By the way, it's a great film that I definitely recommend you go see. Finally, some people say human embryos aren't persons because they're just a few cells. But I remind them that humans are not constructed with cells like a building is constructed with bricks, where it would make sense to say a few bricks is not a building.
You know, the part that's sometimes missed with the whole, I forget what is, the ship of Odysseus or the ship of Theseus, is that that's also a metaphor for human beings, because every 7 years our cells are completely different. There's very few original cells that last your entire life. So how much of you is you? It's just a really interesting question. You know, maybe some of you is still in your spine, but if someone gets their spine severed and they still have their brain, how much of that is them? How much of that person is that person? And then questions of like Alzheimer's or dementia. Once that personality, that character is gone, is that person still the same person? So there's way more issues here that it's not that Trent Horn's opening a can of worms. He's taking worms from different cans and pouring them on top of it and saying, see, it's such a mess, we just shouldn't allow it. I just don't think that's a good approach.
Instead, human beings develop like a photograph, and we are present at the very beginning. When you take a Polaroid picture, everything is present the moment the picture is taken. It just takes time to recognize that once the image develops. And the same is true of human embryos. Everything that makes this child a human being is present from fertilization. It just takes time to develop so that we can recognize it. So when it comes to the issue of in vitro fertilization, we should heed Jesus' advice in Matthew 10:16. Be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. We should acknowledge the goodness of children who come into existence from IVF, while also showing people the badness of everything associated with IVF, like killing unborn children, exploiting women. And
all right, I'm going to let the video finish. Then afterwards, I need a vote. What do you guys want to do? Do you want to do another video, or do you want to switch to an open room? If we switch to an open room, I got to shut down and reset up for a different streaming platform. If you want to just go into the next video, I think I'm going to do Warren Smith next. Let me guys know what you guys want to do, okay? If you guys want to switch to an open room, let me know.
And allowing children to essentially be purchased by anyone through a commercial process, and then ask if this is a price we are willing to pay for a fertility treatment. We should then be shrewd in discussing how the law should treat IVF. And as pro-lifers, we can offer a consistent solution that only focuses on helping parents who use IVF to treat their children like children. That would indirectly cripple the IVF industry. If you'd like to learn more about this subject, check out my interview with Stephanie Gray Connors, who's written an entire book on IVF called Conceived by Science. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you all so much.
Okay, so I need a vote in the chat, at least one vote. By the way, everybody who voted on what we were going to watch today, thank you so much. IVF did win out. It was basically a tie, but since the first voting went to the IVF stuff, that's the one that won. But yeah, I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to try to present you guys with a menu every time we switch to new videos. Let me know real quick if anybody wants to do another video. If not, I'm going to switch to an open room. And I'll stream maybe for another hour. Anybody? Okay. You gotta find a way to put something on there. We got over here. Offline? No, we're not offline. All right, we're gonna switch to an open room. Dear crap, I wish I could pronounce things. And then we'll be right back, okay?
To be reality. This isn't the same when I'm on this stage right now.
Do it on my own, so I gotta get through it. And the only thing I know is to love what I'm doing. Never give up, never slow, till I finally prove it. Never listen to the no's, I just wanna keep moving. Keep my head up when I act, head up, that's a fact. Never looking back, Gotta keep myself on track, keep my head up, staying strong. Always moving on, feel I don't belong. Tell my thoughts to move along, push myself to be the best.